The dawn of unending hope, discovering the power of the resurrection. We arrive now at the most breathtaking turn of events in the Gospel of Matthew, the resurrection. Everything we've encountered, every miracle, every teaching, every act of compassion, and the shattering heartbreak of the crucifixion, ushers us into this moment when the unimaginable happens. So, I invite you to pause for a second and clear your mind of any assumptions. Try to see the scene through fresh eyes, as if you had never heard the story before. We stand at the edge of a new dawn, unsure whether hope can truly bloom in the shadow of such devastating loss. But we are about to witness a reversal that will challenge every notion we have about life, death, and the unstoppable power of divine love. Imagine the quiet of early morning, just before the sun breaks over the horizon. The city is hushed, still recovering from the turbulence of the past few days. Jesus has been crucified, laid in a tomb sealed by a heavy stone. Guards stand watch. To all appearances, the dream of a kingdom of love and justice has died with him. The disciples, scattered by fear and grief, are left with a haunting sense of finality. But then come the women, laden with spices and heartbreak, determined to pay their last respects. In Matthew's account, these courageous women, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, arrive at the tomb, perhaps expecting nothing more than a silent vigil. Suddenly, an earthquake shakes the ground. Imagine the jolt of the earth beneath your feet, your heart racing with adrenaline. And there, an angel of the Lord descends, rolling back the stone. The guards become like dead men from sheer terror. But the angel tells the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen." In that cosmic instant, despair cracks open like the tomb itself, revealing a radiance that nobody, certainly not the Roman authorities, not the religious elites, perhaps not even the disciples themselves, could have anticipated. The women, stunned and overjoyed, hurry away, half in wonder and half in disbelief. And who should they meet on the path but the risen Jesus himself, calling them to share the news with the others. In one swift moment, the story is utterly transformed. The sorrow of Friday yields to the uncontainable triumph of Sunday morning. When you think about it, that's a pattern that often repeats in our personal lives as well. We experience nights of despair, moments when everything seems lost, and then something shifts in a way we never saw coming. Could it be that every dark night carries within it the seed of a new dawn? If we reflect on the resurrection purely as an event, we might risk turning it into a historical curiosity, something that happened once upon a time. But the beauty of Matthew's account is that the resurrection bursts into our present tense. It's not just a fact, it's a living force that continues to shape hearts, communities, and even the arc of history. Think about how the disciples must have felt when they first heard the news. Could it really be true? The possibility seemed almost too much to believe. But hope had returned. And that hope was not a vague, feel-good notion, it was a living person they could speak with, touch, eat with. They discovered that love indeed had the final word. Notice, too, that the first people entrusted with this earth-shattering message were women, an astounding detail, given the cultural norms of that era, where women's testimony was often disregarded or undervalued. Matthew underscores that God's kingdom operates in ways that consistently challenge human assumptions and hierarchies. By choosing these faithful women to be the first witnesses, the gospel displays a divine pattern. God often lifts up the humble and the overlooked to carry the greatest truths. So, if you ever feel that your voice doesn't matter, or that society has diminished your worth, Matthew's resurrection account offers a powerful rebuttal. Sometimes the very people the world discounts are precisely the ones entrusted with the most vital revelations. Soon after, Jesus appears to his disciples, who have been grappling with confusion and fear. In one moment, they move from utter despair to an astonished, hesitant joy, some of them still doubting, still unsure what to make of it all. We can't blame them, can we? When we've been beaten down by disappointment or heartbreak. It's hard to let hope, Indiana. Yet Jesus meets them right there, in the ambiguity of faith mixed with doubt. The resurrected Christ doesn't wait for them to reach a perfect level of certainty. He comes to them in their actual state of mind and invites them onward. That alone holds a wealth of wisdom for you and me. Maybe you find yourself wrestling with uncertainty about faith, or your place in the world, or whether God even notices you. The message here is that God's not afraid of your questions. He meets you in the tension, inviting you to keep walking with him. In these final verses of Matthew, commonly referred to as the Great Commission, Jesus tasks his disciples with a mission that reverberates across centuries: go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. This is the moment that transforms a local band of followers into a movement with a global vision. In a single charge, Jesus bridges cultural, ethnic, and national boundaries, proclaiming that this message of love, forgiveness, and redemption is meant for everyone, no exceptions. Could you imagine how radical that sounded in a time when tribal identity and territorial conflicts were so pervasive? Actually, it's still radical today. We live in a world that often draws thick dividing lines around race, nationality, religion, and social status. Yet the resurrected Christ calls us to go out into all nations, to all people, with a message that transcends those boundaries. Perhaps we should ask ourselves, are we living up to that call in our personal circles? Or do we limit our love and compassion to those who look, think, or act like us? Another powerful dimension of the resurrection is how it reframes our understanding of death. For many of us, death is the ultimate ending, the final heartbreak. But here, Jesus dismantles the notion that death is invincible. By rising, he demonstrates that the God who breathed life into the universe holds power even over mortality's strongest grip. This doesn't eliminate the reality of grief or sorrow in our human lives, but it does set a different horizon. What seems like the end from our perspective can be transformed into a gateway. If you've ever stood at a graveside or said a painful goodbye, this truth can bring comfort that surpasses mere platitudes. It suggests that the story is far from over, that the author of life can bring beauty out of the ashes in ways we can scarcely imagine. Yet we can't overlook how Matthew's gospel refuses to paint the disciples as flawless heroes. Even in the moment of resurrection joy, there are hints that some remain uncertain. Elsewhere, we read about how Thomas wants tangible proof, or how Peter struggles with his failures. Such honesty grounds the narrative in reality. Faith is often messy, a process rather than a one-time leap. Sometimes we believe wholeheartedly, other times doubts creep in. The resurrection stands as a beacon. But God doesn't expect us to bypass our honest questions. Instead, it becomes the bedrock on which we can build a faith that is both intellectually and spiritually alive. Faith that never wrestles with doubt may risk becoming shallow or untested. Could it be that our biggest questions, if pursued honestly, might actually fortify our faith instead of destroy it? As the disciples eventually come to terms with the resurrection, we see them transformed from timid, frightened individuals into bold proclaimers of good news. It doesn't happen overnight. But the seeds of courage are planted by that first encounter with the risen Jesus. Later, in the book of Acts, these same disciples stand up against powerful authorities, suffer persecution, and even give their lives rather than renounce the truth they experienced. That kind of radical shift points to something more than wishful thinking or a group hallucination. It suggests a genuine encounter with a reality that upended their entire worldview. Here's a probing question: if we genuinely believed we carried the power of resurrection in our hearts, how might that change the way we confront our own fears and trials? Let's bring this back down to practical life for a moment. The resurrection isn't just a spiritual event to be celebrated once a year, it's a transformative principle that can infuse our everyday decisions. Each time we choose love over hate, forgiveness over resentment, hope over cynicism, we echo the resurrection's truth that light can shatter darkness. In our relationships, consider how a resurrection mindset might transform conflict into reconciliation, or how it could breathe new life into a marriage on the brink of collapse. At work, what if we treated every person, from the janitor to the CEO, with the dignity and kindness Jesus modeled? Remembering that each individual is someone Christ was willing to die for? On a larger scale, how might communities change if Christians everywhere took the resurrection seriously enough to stand against injustice, champion the poor, and practice unwavering compassion? Now, let's not ignore the reality that Matthew also mentions a counternarrative spreading among some of the religious leaders and soldiers, the claim that Jesus' body was simply stolen by his disciples. This rumor tries to negate the resurrection, attributing it to a fraud. What strikes me is that even from the very beginning, people tried to rationalize or dismiss what happened. And isn't that a dynamic that persists to this day? We often encounter skepticism, people saying the resurrection is a myth, a metaphor, or a hoax. Believers, of course, affirm it as a historical, literal event. Whichever side of that argument one might stand on, one can't ignore the monumental impact of the resurrection claim, which propelled a small, marginalized group of followers into a movement that reshaped history. Whether you approach it from a strictly historical perspective or as an article of faith, it's impossible to discount the transformative power that radiates from the resurrection's core message, that love conquered death. When we speak of resurrection power, we're touching on something that goes beyond mere optimism. It's the belief that God can bring life where we see only decay, whether in broken relationships, communities torn by violence, or hearts weighed down by shame. If the resurrection is real, then no situation is truly hopeless. Have you ever encountered a moment so bleak you were certain no good could emerge from it, and yet, unexpectedly, something beautiful rose from the ashes? That might have been a resurrection moment. A small yet potent reflection of the principle we see magnified in Christ's victory over the grave. Yet, the resurrection also challenges us to live with accountability. In conquering death, Jesus doesn't just give us a free pass to keep living on our own terms. He commissions us, calls us, to share this hope in our families, workplaces, and communities. That's where the rubber meets the road. Are we willing to live in a way that testifies to the hope we've discovered? Or do we keep it hidden because we fear ridicule or rejection? The disciples, once fearful, become brave. Perhaps we, too, can find that same courage. We don't need to have everything figured out, we need only to hold on to the truth that love is stronger than death and that God's grace can work wonders through ordinary people. One aspect of the Gospel of Matthew that often moves me is the subtlety of Jesus' final promise, "I am with you always, even to the end of the age." This line might initially slip by as a comforting farewell. But if you reflect on it, it's downright earth-shattering. We're talking about the very presence of God abiding with us. Not in some abstract sense, but in a tangible companionship through life's highs and lows. This means that faith isn't just about following moral commands or adhering to a religious tradition, it's about relationship. The crucified and risen one is with us, guiding us, comforting us, challenging us. If we truly recognized that presence in our daily lives, how might we interact differently with each person we meet, each decision we make, each trial we face? Allow me to pose a deeply personal question. In your own heart, where do you most need to experience resurrection right now? Maybe it's in the realm of self-worth, where past failures have convinced you you're unlovable. Maybe it's a strained relationship with a parent or sibling. Perhaps it's an addiction, a battle against depression, or a series of disappointments that have left you jaded. The resurrection suggests that no grave is permanent. It says that what seems beyond hope can be infused with new life. Does that mean a magic fix? Not necessarily. But it can mean the start of a journey where despair no longer has the final say. As we stand now at the conclusion of Matthew's Gospel, it's remarkable to see how the story has come full circle, from the birth of Jesus, heralded as Emmanuel, God with us, to the risen Christ proclaiming, "I am with you always." The entire Gospel is a tapestry, weaving a narrative of God entering human history, demonstrating a divine kingdom defined by love, dying to redeem, and rising to transform. This narrative invites you and me into a living hope, a purpose that transcends our limitations, and a community that spans centuries and continents. The early disciples accepted that invitation, launching into a future they could never have envisioned. Their courage and faith set the world aflame with the message that Jesus is alive. And now it's your turn. Our turn. The invitation stands, just as it did back then. To read the Gospel of Matthew is to stand at a crossroads where we must respond in one way or another. We can walk away, dismissing the resurrection as an implausible fable. Or we can lean in and let it reorient how we see ourselves, others, and the divine. For many, the resurrection is the reason to keep believing that this world, despite all its pain and injustice, can be redeemed. For others, it's a catalyst to serve, to love, and to fight for justice with a passion fueled by something greater than themselves. And for those who are unsure, it might be an open door to a path of discovery, a journey that dares to ask, if there is a God who can defeat death, what else might be possible? Throughout this final segment, we've witnessed how the resurrection of Jesus is more than just a one-time historical claim. It's a lens through which we can view every heartbreak, every longing, every moment of triumph. It's a living power that dares us to hope in the face of despair and invites us to carry that hope to a waiting world. We may not fully understand it all, and that's okay. The disciples didn't either at first, but they found something so real, so compelling, that they dedicated their lives to sharing it. And because of their testimony, passed down through generations, illuminated by countless acts of love and devotion, we find ourselves here, reading Matthew's words and finding them as alive and vital as ever. So, as we close this journey through a captivating summary of the Gospel of Matthew, faith like you've never seen before, let me leave you with one final, challenging question. If the resurrection is the triumphant core of reality, if love truly conquers death, how might that change your priorities, your relationships, and the legacy you hope to leave? I can't answer that for you, but I can suggest that this question, if taken seriously, has the power to spark a transformation in your life that could ripple out to countless others. You might find yourself called to reconcile with someone you've long resisted forgiving, or to volunteer in a ministry that serves the marginalized, or to spend quiet moments each day contemplating a presence far greater than yourself. The specifics will be unique to each of us, but the essence is the same: letting the resurrection rearrange our understanding of what truly matters. In the end, the Gospel of Matthew offers us Jesus the Messiah, born in humility, teaching with radical authority, healing the broken, confronting corruption, bearing the weight of the world's sin, and ultimately rising in victory. It's a testament to a God who doesn't remain distant but enters our tangled human story, suffers with us, and leads us toward new life. You, I, and we together are invited to step into that story, not as passive observers but as active participants. May this invitation move you to reflect deeply, to love boldly, and to embrace the living hope that has outlasted every empire and every dark night. Thank you for walking through this journey of Matthew's Gospel with me. I hope that as you ponder these truths, you'll sense that stirring within. Perhaps it's the gentle voice of the resurrected Christ calling you by name, telling you he's been with you all along and will remain with you, even to the end of the age. May that promise inspire you to go forth and shine your own light in a world that desperately needs it, guided by the unending hope of a love that broke open the tomb and changed history forever. This is faith like you've never seen before, a faith grounded in the reality of a risen Savior, beckoning you to step beyond fear into the life you were meant to live. May the Gospel of Matthew ignite that flame in your heart and keep it burning bright, reminding us that we are never alone, and that death is not the end. If he is indeed risen, everything has changed, and it might just change you, too.